Hello, and welcome to episode 125 and the last Blood Brothers. Tonight we're joined by Sean Coleman. Hello, Sean.
Hello.
And what a way to go out, Sean, if this is the way.
Well, I mean, never say never.
Never say never, but
We're
for
not
now.
saying that this guest has killed us off either. Let's just...
I want a bit of story, a backstory here. So this is the last Blood Brothers.
Potentially, yes.
Is everyone the last one? You're just saying this to give me a sort of sense of jeopardy or something, or is this actually
having just accused Sir Elton of being a bit status quo on the comeback tours? I think we need to just say this is an episode of Blood Brothers, and there may be a comeback, but we're having a hiatus for a little while.
When you're in the vestry getting ready to celebrate the Eucharist, there's usually a little sign up which says "Celebrate this Eucharist as if it were your last."
This is what we're doing here.
Well, you'll have heard who our guest is, and you'll have recognized those dulcet tones. We're joined tonight by the Reverend Richard Coles. Hello.
Hello.
So lovely to have you.
It's lovely to be on this one. Very flattered that you should be the silver swan's last note should be my voice croaking away down the Zoom.
No, I think there's nothing more appropriate. I've been so excited about this since Chris said about 700 years ago. We've got the Reverend Richard Coles. I was like, you're what now? Got who?
I'm so excited. Is what I'm very
excited. We're all excited.
Excellent.
And the listeners should be. Please, could you tell us a little bit about A Death in the Parish to start with?
A Death in the Parish is the second in the Canon Clement murder mystery series. Canon Clement, Daniel Clement is the rector of Champton St Mary, which is a little village in Middle England in the end of the 1980s. He lives in the rectory with his mother Audrey and his two dachshunds, Cosmo and Hilda. There is a large estate with an aristocratic family living in a historic house called the De Flores at Champton House, and scattered around the village are exactly the kind of people you expect to find in a place like that, at a time like that, very settled, pastoral, English scene. And then all of a sudden, in book one, which was called Murder Before Evensong, it does what it says on the tin. There's a murder before Evensong. Murderous rage explodes in this tranquil place, and it all goes upside down, and it's Daniel's job to try to figure out what's going on and to try to put it right. Book two starts not long after the events of book one have sort of calmed down a little bit, but of course nothing ever really calms down after something like that. And that tension, that anxiety that is in the very air they breathe is suddenly galvanized again by another murder, which comes along simultaneously with the arrival of a new colleague for Daniel. Pastoral reorganisation has come to Champton St Mary, and the parishes of Lower and Upper Badsaddle have been lumped in with him. So he has a new colleague and a whole new dynamic to explore there. And on other fronts, events are taking their course, and Daniel's own life is coming a little bit disrupted in a way he hadn't anticipated. And that's where we are with A Death in the Parish. There's a lot of dog action in this one too. Dachshund lovers will really I'm number one in Amazon dog care, apparently.
Dog care. I love those sort of, because there's a category of cozy crime that is specifically for pets and animals.
Oh.
And I think when you're number one-ing there, you've really niched there. But then what you're up against there is people whose dogs and cats are solving the crimes, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to blow my golden trumpet, but I'm also number one in Anglicanism, apparently, too.
Hello,
how the sophistication of the way they crunch the data, who knows? Maybe it's all done with DNA or something, I'm not sure.
I do quite enjoy that, though. I love those sort of niche little. Oh, that's funny. I'm number one in ghost romance, but
that's good.
That's not what this book is. So people may be suddenly throwing in a 1-star review for this ghost romance that's got neither ghosts nor romance in it.
I think you should be entitled to some comeback, really, if you've been miscategorized. I've been miscategorized all my life. I know what it's like.
You'd think, but yeah, and likewise, you just kind of go, do you know what? Labels are for other people.
Exactly.
You want to 1-star me for who I am? Knock yourself out.
I'm sure you get absolute galaxies of stars.
Yes, most of them won, but if you put them all together, oh my God.
Exactly. Well, Moni and Mickle,
God.
Max and Muckle, as they say.
They're absolutely amazing. I wanted to talk to you about where authorship came in, because obviously a man of my age was a huge fan of the Communards,
Well, thank you.
and very much enjoyed that pathway. And then obviously you were Vicar and Findon, and I very much enjoyed your autobiography and learning how you came from that to this, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to write these novels. You're like, oh, multi-instrumentalist, done it. Vicar, not a problem. Theologian, not so much a problem. Now I'm going to just write a novel.
It sounds a bit ridiculous, doesn't it? And I realised that
It's
my
great fun,
CV.
though.
Well, the thing about my CV, if it were to arrive on my desk, I would just assume it to be the work of a fantasist and maybe get my security people to make some discreet inquiries.
You
But
have
I,
security.
well, do you know, I did actually have to have for a while. That's another story. But well, I don't know. It's just, I mean, your own life is your own life, isn't it? It's one thing after another. You don't particularly think about it. You just sort of try and live forwards and reflect backwards, as Kierkegaard recommended wisely. But I don't know, though, if I sort of think about it, I see there are sort of twists and turns in it, which do seem rather baffling, perhaps, to the casual observer. I mean, I think there have been some consistent threads within it. One of them is Sherlock Holmes, because the first proper book I ever got, my grandfather gave it to me when I was 8 years old, bought, was speaking in Independent Bookshop Week. Well, we're speaking of the week after Independent, you know what I mean, independent bookshops, great places. Bought in an independent bookshop was the complete Sherlock Holmes short stories, and I was completely captivated by them. I loved the speckled band, the lion's mane, the beryl coronet, all those sort of vivid imagery of that. And then most of all, this captivating figure of Sherlock Holmes, who just strange, enigmatic person, kind of on the edge of things and at the heart of things, whose relationships were difficult, who was awkward, and yet managed to sort of see in the apparently innocuous surface of things evidence of dark truths. And I'm ashamed I'm so captivated with it. I made my mum buy me a deer stalker, which I used to wear around Kettering, with a magnifying glass looking for clues.
Dear stalker, never.
I swear to God, I walked around Kettering with a magnifying glass and a deer stalker. I was beaten up by every other child in Kettering at every 14 feet, basically.
They were jealous
Deservedly
of your
so.
dear stalker, and that's their own issue.
Well, I was just sort of fascinated by it. And I think that idea of that sort of captivating figure lodged in me, really. And so perhaps it's not a surprise that I should find myself having a go at crime fiction, because that's really got my literary interest going. I've always written. I've had to write in one form or another for what I'm doing. So after a while, you look behind you and you see you've actually written quite a lot. Most of it non-fiction, although somebody said my autobiography read like fiction.
But again, that's your life.
but then I just wanted to create an imagined world and put some imagined people in it and have a go, really. And so I suppose when it happened, I thought, oh, actually, I've probably been running up to this for quite a while.
And I think there's something really interesting in that, and I love that Sherlock was was your big influence, because I think something that you say in terms of, and I've heard you interviewed in media a number of times, but there's always this sort of understanding of how humans work, in the way that you speak, in the way that you address things, in the way that you address the way people deal with you, with your changes in life, with everything that has happened to you, and there's this understanding of the way people's work. And then obviously being a vicar, there's a huge responsibility in understanding how people evolve and think and whatever, and then you get to take all of that, extrapolate it, stick it in some characters, and play. And I think actually it's sort of divine in a way, that you get it in all senses of that you get to play that game.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I attempt to understand what's going on with people. I try to understand what's going on with people, because people are eternally mysterious. Thank goodness, wouldn't have them any other way. But I'm nosy, and also I'm curious about things as well as people. And also being a vicar ex officio, you become a detective, because quite often you're faced with a situation where you think, why the hell did you do that? Or who is doing that? Or why did that happen? And you start having to try to work out from a pattern, or rather a disruption in a pattern, what's going on. And my older brother is a detective, was retired now, but he was a detective in the Met for many years, 30 years. And we would sometimes, swap notes a bit, and we would talk about the sort of same methods applied for different, but again, it's trying to work out from disruptions in the pattern what's going on, really.
Just trying to wheedle the truth out of people one way or another.
It's not that. I mean, if you ask people to tell you the truth, they may think they have done exactly that, but usually the truth about people is not what they tell you, it's what they don't tell you, or what they half tell you, or what they want to tell you but feel they can't, or what they have no awareness of themselves. So you have to kind of look for... I'm sounding a bit like a Victoria Corin Mitchell playing poker, but I'm not that clever. It's just, so the usual thing, people come in and they'll talk to you for an hour, and then they'll leave, and at the door they'll turn around and tell you the thing that you needed to know. And I mean, I had a friend who's a priest, he's dead now, but an amazing priest. He had this extraordinary reputation for being able to see into people's souls, and he would know what was wrong with them before they told him. And I was amazed by this, again, Sherlock Holmes. And I remember I got to know him quite well, and when he retired, I said, it's an amazing thing, this extraordinary gift you have of knowing what's wrong with people before they tell you. He said, it's not a gift. And I said, what is it? He said, because people mess their lives up in one of 4 ways: domestic violence, addiction, money, sex. I can't remember what it was, the categories were. And that's absolutely true. I found that to be true in my own pastoral ministry, is that people bring to you the same things over and over again, because guess what? Human beings do not have a limitless repertoire of ways of messing their lives up and other people's lives up. Sometimes they can be a bit surprising, but on the whole, it's the same things. And you just get to see what they look like in people and tell from what they're not telling you what perhaps might be going on. And so, detective work is part of it, I think.
Does the fact that there are only sort of 4 things make crime writing difficult?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think it's the things that, what motivates people when things go haywire. Well, often it's fear. Often they're scared of losing something: prestige, money, somebody they love and care for, desire or need. So the repertoire of that is quite small, but the way it plays out is endless and infinite, I'd say, in its variety and its permutations. And I mean, you know all about this, far more about it than I do. I've only really just sort of started doing this stuff. But I'm really interested in those permutations and for me, often a story begins with one of those, somebody doing a thing and me thinking, why did you do that? And then trying to answer that question. Sometimes I'll think, oh, well, maybe that was why, and maybe that fits in with that. And then you begin to see a hidden truth emerge, perhaps. Well, you make it up. Also, it's a great thing about writing fiction, isn't it? Is you can make them kill people. And my job as a vicar was mostly to prevent them killing people, if possible, or killing any more people.
Why, if they've fallen down that path. And I think the thing is like, we write our own things, and we understand that process. But what's interesting for our listeners is that is every author that we speak to, there's similarities, and then there's differences in origin and so your origin story, as in you're some superhero, but it's that idea of like, what drove you to go, today I'm going to actually tell this story, rather than make a documentary or do this truth or do this, to go, right, I think I've got a story in here. I think I've got fun to be had.
It's a bit like writing a sermon, because obviously vicars have to turn out a sermon every Sunday, sometimes 2. And so you start living basically to try to think of a reason to find something to say in your sermon. So you'll sit on a bus and somebody will say something to someone, or there'll be something on telly or whatever it might be. And you think, oh, I'll have that. And I find I'm sort of doing that now, but really for sort of plot material. Or I had a great one. I've got a friend visiting at the moment who lives in Spain. And when he tries to get in the car, he gets in the wrong door because he forgets he's in Britain and not in Spain. And I just thought, well, that's really interesting. I can do something with somebody who goes to get in the wrong side of the car because he or she. I'm just giving it all away, aren't I? I should hang on to
No,
that.
just.
But you know what I mean? There's those bits where you just see, that's it. Oh yes, I could. Oh yes, I could have something. I could do something with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got there. I got together with a new partner 3 years ago, and
Well, many congratulations to you, Sean.
thanks very much. I know you have recently got together with a new partner too. But I think I've achieved stepdad greatness when the kids walk along a lakeside and look at a boathouse and go, "That would be a nice place to keep a body." Yes, it would, kids. It's great.
But it's so interesting.
Safeguarding or
Safeguarding or providing for their material future. So come on, it's always a trade-off.
Let's have a look.
The other great thing was, if you are a vicar, you have a very, very, very rewarding and rich relationship with funeral directors. And funeral directors are really, really great sources of knowledge about, well, how people die, and then how people might be killed, how you might dispose of bodies, what happens to bodies over time. I've got a friend who's a forensic pathologist, and I can phone her up, and she's very good on the detailed stuff. But actually, funeral directors are really, really good with the sort of richer narrative arcs around those things, I think.
So there's more candor there.
There's more. I think it's just they deal more frequently and with death because my view, I don't know if you'd agree, but I think most murders are undetected, actually, because they don't look like murders, and perhaps people, the murder might be not fully intended, whatever that might mean. So I think funeral directors are often quite good because they might have some perhaps unspoken thoughts about the circumstances surrounding a death, which are not over a sufficient threshold to take any further. It might just be speculative, but that's very useful to someone who's a crime writer or trying to be one.
No, I think you are very successfully one.
Thank you.
I think there's I think it's a very interesting time for cozy. Chris has written cozy crimes. I've written cozy crimes. You've written cozy crimes, and I think we've all done it for slightly different reasons. I know Chris during lockdown was missing home, and he created a series that was basically him and his best mate back in their 20s, haplessly solving crimes, having watched too much Sherlock Holmes on telly.
I'm sold.
And that was it. My cozy crimes are set in 1980s Soho.
Oh, I was there.
Yeah, and that was my thing. What I was trying to do was trying to find a not so cozy, a place where you have gay leads, transvestites eating chips but solving crimes, and this whole sort of rich tapestry of characters that were being neglected by the police, actually actively vilified by the police, and anything that happened within that community had to be solved by that community or be buggered.
That's very interesting.
Literally.
Yeah, well, that's just a very interesting idea, isn't it?
So I created the series, and my God, I loved. They're short. They're 25,000 words each, and I loved writing every one of them. And I've never. They're my 6th to 11th book, and I've never enjoyed writing anything as much.
Isn't that great?
Oh, dog's epilepsy tablet alarm. Sorry, everybody.
That's all right.
Happens at 8:30 every night.
I have a dog with epilepsy too.
Your alarm has not gone off.
Well, she's so fully medicated. That's the least of her problems with epilepsy. She's so full of medications, practically a kind of walking vet pharmacy. So
she's like a rattling along dog.
Yeah.
No, our big one has had cancer and now has epilepsy, but he manages his epilepsy with tablets, so he's fine.
That's good
for a big lad. But yeah,
at this juncture, can we just talk about the sort of packaging of your books, because they are beautiful, and the sort of end papers, do we call them, in both of them are so lovely, aren't they?
Thank you. They've also got, if you take the jackets off on the actual hard bit of the book, there's more lovely things.
A cat,
and on the back.
Oh, a little dog, yeah, lovely.
Yeah, so I've also discovered one. Here's a great tip, folks, for volume sales: put accents in everything.
People go wild for dogs.
Oh my goodness me! They bring them to the bookshop tours. Their little badges. They tweet. They've got their own Twitter handles. It's just lots of great idea. But they were very good. The when we did the first book, I had marvelous editor Federico Andonino, who then at Orion is now moved on to somewhere else, which is very upsetting. But Fed said to the guy, just do what you want, and these are the ingredients, and do what you want. And he did, and we proved it. And of course, I discovered spreadges, which is a whole new thing for me. And so I did a special for Waterstones, and they did spreadges for that. So there are little ducks and silhouettes sprayed.
You genuinely know you've made it when you have spreadges.
Well, I didn't know. I thought everyone got a spreadge, but apparently not.
No.
Well,
you're speaking to we're still virgins on the spread front.
Well, what I can say is climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow
Bring your own spray can
until you get a spread. I saw a magnificent spread the other day. I can't remember who it was. It was just it was like paisley print spread. It was gorgeous.
I remember Stu Turton on the Death thing in the Dark Water had it's incredible, because we had this incredible proof, the paperback proof, and then there was the hardback, and then you guys have gone full out on this. This is well done.
Please, can you tell us a little bit about how you went about creating your main character?
Well, I've been kind of fascinated. Well, part of all, there's always, everything is Sherlock Holmes, right? A bit. So I was just fascinated. I was thinking slightly perhaps of the priest I mentioned earlier, who had this uncanny ability to figure out what was up with people before they told him. And then he just said simply, it's because you get an eye for this sort of thing. But what I really wanted with the character was somebody who was the still center of a turning world. And there's a certain version of priesthood, which is quite a powerful one, which is based on that, I think, this idea of the priest at the center of a community who is unflappable, who is sort of omniscient, who always knows the right thing to say, who is diligent, who is reliable, who is clockwork, who is rock-like. And I'm fascinated by people like that. But if you are such a person, of course, that is only a version of you, and there is much more going on. And actually, you would be a useless priest if you were those things, because priests need to live life too, life in its fullness, and that means failure and not knowing what you're doing and being unable to find the right words. So I wanted to have a character who managed to be that sort of a figure in the life of his community, but was also at the same time having an inner life, which was sometimes disruptive. I thought that was very interesting. And I think that's a way, perhaps, of telling a story not only about him, who as a character I find fascinating, but also about the 1980s, which were themselves a time of extraordinary change. I mean, social attitudes changed. We were talking about this to a friend of mine, and he put the index on social attitudes in 1980. 80% of people thought that gay relationships were always wrong. In 1990, 10 years later, that had gone to 20%. Massive change. And that didn't just happen in Manchester and London and New York and, wherever. It also happened in sleepy little villages like Champton St Mary. And I'm interested in, one of the great things about being a vicar of a country parish is that people think that it'll just be the bazaar and school assemblies and maypole dancing. And it is all those things. But actually, the most cursory reading of human affairs, or indeed English literature, will tell you that life is something that happens everywhere, and that you lift the lid on any community and the same stuff is there and surging away and doing unpredictable and interesting and sometimes frightening things. When I went to my parish, I was in central London before, everyone said, "Oh, you're going to be so bored. It was just going to be, guess the vicar's weight," and that sort of thing. There was a murder in my first week, and the effects of that, the effects of murder, as you will. Cozy crime, it's a misnomer, isn't it? Because actually there's nothing cozy about murder at all. But that's not what the cozy bit means.
But no, it's so strange. When I first heard about it, a friend, my mentor, former university lecturer, Neil Richards, introduced me to the concept of cozy crime years and years ago. So they started writing their Cherringhams, him and Matt Costello. I'd give it maybe 2008-ish. Anyway, And I said, so there's a category. It's called cozy, but somebody dies in each one of your books. He said, not everyone. Sometimes there's a kidnap. I'm like, okay, good, noted. But otherwise, something
Cozy kidnap.
cozy kidnap. Something there's still a crime. Something terrible happens. And he said yes, but the difference is that it's like Greek theatre. It happens off screen. It's let the reader imagine and enjoy the creation and make it more of the mystery. And I think the mystery is the thing in cozy more than the crime. The crime is a thing, but the mystery is.
Very interesting. I noticed in life that when a murder happened, it was like a badly written story, actually, because it just thubbed down in the lives of people this extraordinary thing that was often not foreseen, and everyone affected by it is different forever after. And it doesn't really fit in any narrative. And I often find that reading crime novels, I often think, well, I wish you hadn't done the murder, because I was really enjoying the social comedy here. And all of a sudden, there's a body in the library, and you're thinking, oh, God, you've got to figure all that out now. But I think my view of cozy crime is a little different. I think the coziness is that it is a settled world, and I very consciously try to write that settled world of, an English village with that pastoral complement to it, because then it's disrupted by something awful, and then it has to be put back together again. And I think what that offers the reader is reassurance, perhaps. And I sometimes think that's what people are looking for. It's what I'm looking for, I should say, is reassurance that a disrupted world can be made right. So interesting, this flourishing of crime fiction in Britain in the late 1930s. What's that about? Well, I don't know, but I suspect that some of it was people were looking forwards and thinking, oh, I don't really like what's coming. And that produces anxiety, and it needs to go somewhere. And I think perhaps we're, the world is pretty uncertain at the moment, I think, and maybe the appetite for cozy crime is partly a need for some kind of reassurance. I don't know. I'm just making something
I
go along.
definitely I agree with that. I saw with my sort of publishing hat on, which may soon also leave my head, but as a publisher, an independent publisher of small press, where we flourished in lockdown was cozy, and it was cozy that had been written for 4 or 5 years before lockdown, but it felt like people wanted something that could bring a bit of peace and stability at a time when everything else was actual death, and actual heartache and actual physical pain from an outside environment. And I think people just wanted to not hear about serial killers and psychopaths and sociopaths, and we've got enough of that in government, and we don't need to get political or anything. But from 2020 to now, everybody's just sort of thought, I just want to read. I like crime, and I want to read about crime, but I don't want to hurt when I read. So I think we've gone to it's not necessarily a less dark place, because, as you say, there's still a body, and it still kind of ruins the social comedy that we were enjoying. But I think people just sort of enjoy the intellectual game more than the brutal criminality of it.
Yeah. I mean, do you think there's also, I think people, and I've observed this it's about if you're a priest, no one's interested in our sermons. No one can sing the hymns. No one can say the prayers. Nobody comes to church. But they're interested in priests. There's something about the idea of someone who's made a sort of commitment like that, even if it's a commitment you couldn't imagine making yourself, that has enduring fascination. I wonder if it's to do with the idea of there being someone in a community who is a confessor, a confidant, I don't know, and maybe a good guy, someone who tries to, I've got plenty aren't, of course, but someone who tries to who believes in something and tries to live in accordance with that belief. And maybe that is not only enduringly fascinating, but it's especially fascinating in a world which seems to be dominated by knaves and fools, perhaps. I don't know.
And I think it's like, for me, a lot of my other fiction, apart from my Soho Noirs, it all questions what people will do in the name of religion on the darker side. So it will question how people will use religion as a shield, as a backbone for their own Machiavellian intent, and then kind of say, well, wouldn't it be nice? Like, it would be lovely to have a police character, a detective in the Metropolitan Police, for example, that was just a really solid, nice person. No alcoholism,
decent guy,
no divorce. Just really wanted the community to do a bit better. But I think there's something we all hit upon where you just go, wouldn't it be nice if our lead in solving this mystery wasn't a sociopath, wasn't the mirror of the people they're chasing?
Yeah. Also, I'm so bored of Mavericks, partly because Tom Cruise flying his jets around in Top Gun 1 and 2. But Maverick is it's like eccentric. Anyone who thinks they're a Maverick is probably about as Maverick as my Aunt Fanny. Well, actually, she was quite Maverick, I think, but you know what I mean. Well, like, anyone who thinks they're eccentric is probably really not very eccentric at all. I'm interested in people who aren't sort of self-consciously trying to be something, as if they were a contestant on The Apprentice, you know. That would be a good place for, well, mass murder, perhaps.
Yeah, that's more mass murder. That's just wishful thinking. They
You're
do that
caught
themselves on the television.
You're nicked. That would
all
be good. Yeah. Yeah, it's an intro. The thing about fascinating about religion, I mean, I don't want to give too much away about the book, but one of the characters in the book I'm particularly interested in is someone who there's a persistent problem for religious people, is that you live especially if you're representatives like clergy are, you know, you're supposed to live out your faith in a way that's for all to see, and it's a bit like fame, you can start doing that, but then the version of you that's out there doing that grows more distant day by day from the reality of you. And should that person out there all of a sudden turn around and face you, you might not recognize it. And that could be quite interesting. And I've known clergy who've been so good at doing it, you know, living it out, that they have become blind to their own. I used to know this bloke, retired vicar, who cheated at card games. And it was like, what? It was such a weird thing to have done, because he was such a model, fine, upstanding citizen, but he just loved a little. I think he might have gone shoplifting, I'm not sure. Just a little thing, the old Adam asserting himself.
Better have your little thing, haven't you?
Because guess what? We are all sinners, and everyone has their things.
I shared a student house way back in the early 90s with a guy who was studying theology, and he wasn't planning to go on to a priesthood or anything else. So he's studying. And I said, what drew you there? And he said, I'm really interested in politics, but not modern politics. And that for him, theology was the history of politics.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it was such an interesting take on it. And we talked at length, because I've constantly questioned why people have faith and why they are drawn to faith, and I understand completely. And so a lot of the characters and the things I write are either influenced by faith or are fiercely rejecting faith, having been put in there. And his take on it is just like a history of politics. You go, well, that is interesting. And when you take everything right back to the core, that's a cool way of looking at religion across the ages. And
I loved the academic theology I did, partly because it wasn't one thing, but it was three things. So you get church history, which is fascinating, the sort of disputes of the early fathers of the church, the creedal controversies of the 4th century, all that stuff, endlessly fascinating. If you ever want to understand, or to have a kind of finely expressed and considered account of how people get things massively wrong, then read the accounts of the early Arian controversies. Fascinating. And then there's languages. So for me, it was I majored in Greek of the New Testament, and that was fascinating. It opened up a text which is so fundamental to Western culture, the text of the New Testament, but actually reading it in the language in which it was written was fascinating. And the other thing is doctrine, which is trying to understand why people thought this was important, what it had to offer them as they tried to live their lives. So it was a very fertile, fascinating areas of study, I think.
I think it's the doctrine side that really fascinated me, with just in that point of saying, we have masses who are illiterate, and this is a way of saying, try not to nick your neighbour's livestock or wife. This is handy to stop.
Leave them alone.
Just, be nice to each other, chill, everybody be cool. And it just go, when you boil it down to it, it's literally ways of trying to make people behave. And then when you turn that to crime writing and you say, right, well, how do we make people behave, and why do we understand why people behave the way they do? The same questions come about. Why do you do what you do?
Yeah.
Why would you go so far as to kill somebody for that?
Well, that's fascinating, isn't it? I find some of the most poignant moments I had in ministry were deathbeds, where someone would be tormented on their deathbed about something, and I would say to them, "What's the matter?" And they would tell me, and I would realize that it was really not very much at all, but it had lain across their life like a sort of demon, sucking the joy out of them, darkening their world and other people's worlds. And it was really not that big a deal, but to them it was. To them it was the thing that, deformed their lives, and they were full of regret about it. It was usually by then too late to do very much about it. But
you think how much could have changed across generations by a simple intervention.
Yeah.
A conversation of it's as simple, it's as black and white as.
I mean, you sometimes get that with murderers in particular. I was doing prison ministry in particular. And, some people, you could see that the damage that they had suffered in their own lives when they were vulnerable, it's just so obvious, isn't it, that would create in them create for them a future which would not be great. That was often the case. But so often you would just think, if you had turned left instead of right, if you'd got the next bus rather than that bus, if you'd been wearing trousers instead of a skirt, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, all of these.
Yeah.
It's interesting that my partner works with children who are struggling to get into school because of the stuff that's happening in families, or difficult families, parents with addictions, parents with everything else, and just the constant, you see the grandparents come and pick them up from school, and you see the mirror and the mirror and the mirror, and you look at those kids and go, what can we do to lift you up and put you in a different place and make this? But you can't.
Not very much, I think, because it's systemic problems, and some of them not just systemic, some of them are just hardwired into people, I think. The interesting thing about church, of course, is everyone on the outside, not everyone, lots of people on the outside think that there's places where you're meant to waltz around being holy, and actually they're laboratories for the reality of being human, and often really quite fierce and difficult and hostile. And if they weren't, they wouldn't be real, would they? It wouldn't. And there's something about a church. If people are drawn to church, lots of people are not, but lots of people are, and they bring with them stuff they might not even be aware they're bringing, because it's profound and it's deep and it's mysterious, and people have been bringing stuff like that to places like that for a long time, and they've still got this slightly kind of magnetic quality, I think, for people who are perhaps troubled, and also people who delight in things too. They're fascinating places just to hang around.
Definitely. I think there's a sort of grounding there that you go, this is the foundations of this have been around longer than I can imagine, and so therefore I'm grounded here.
Yeah.
I can, whether I believe, whether I'm from a different religion, whether I'm whatever, I can stand in this place and understand what instructed people to build it, why things were so important.
Even just that you're there too. I used to love, when I was in church going early in the morning, I had a lovely historic church, 13th century, 14th century, and there's just this little bit where I would walk from the vestry to the vicar's stall, and often on my own, and that part of the floor was just worn hollow slightly because hundreds of pairs of feet before mine had walked that same walk, going back in that building to the Wars of the Roses before, in fact. And that affects you, I think. And you feel this great fellow feeling with the people who are not like you at all in some ways, but actually were like you in other ways doing it, you know?
I thought I used to live in a pub that had been it started life as a hostelry in the 1600s, and like you, the flags going into what became the lounge were worn hollow. The floorboards upstairs were you know, if you weren't drunk walking up them, you certainly felt it.
Yeah.
But you felt the presence of everybody that had passed.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, and that the way a stone can be worn flat by people kneeling, people is the same. I visited a temple in Sri Lanka and looked at a stone that had been used for sort of sacrifice, and you go, okay, it's a different wearing out, but Jesus, people have been here.
Yeah.
It sort of grounds you slightly in that place, I think. Interesting. And then we turn it to go, right, why would you kill why would you kill the head of the WI?
Gosh, well, I haven't killed it in the dreams.
Never go to the WI, you'd lose readership.
Well, oh no, I'm an old hand actually. Flower guilds, I've always found places where human depravity can most often be active. That's a big one.
Fingerprint in the Oasis.
Just
God, that's a title for a book right there. Right.
Fingerprint in the Oasis. That's very good. Yeah, or somebody not tidying up there. My first ever victim in crime fiction was killed with a pair of secateurs. I had to check with my forensic pathologist friend about how you would actually effectively kill someone with a pair of secateurs. It can be done. It's not an optimum weapon. You pick another one.
I was going to say it's a bit sneaky.
No, it's you get the jaggy side, and then you pull the neck back and you jag it into the carotid. Is the way to do it. Jeez. You need to know what you're doing.
That is not the way I ever would have used a pair of secateurs. I'd have been there. Just hold your head.
I mean, you do think that very often, don't you? I was again talking to my forensic pathologist friend, and she would say that you can tell from the knife wounds whether someone's experienced or inexperienced. So there's having a go before they kind of get it right, and like any other enterprise, they can be imperfectly done, and some people are better at it than others.
Jesus. Like when they teach you to inject, and they use an orange so that you get a sense of the skin and everything when you're injecting somebody who needs medicating. You think, can you imagine as a killer being like, right, well, we start with the cabbage, maybe we start with the melon, and then get to the cabbage, and then get to, like, what most replicates, so you get it perfect first time, so that the forensic pathologist thinks, bugger me, this guy's done it before.
But I always wonder a bit about executioners. I mean, one day it's your first go, and you start off, I imagine, as an assistant, and then one day someone says, all right, Harry, today you're in charge.
You're the Axeman. Oh, bloody hell.
Blimey. See, well, I've seen it 100 times, but it's really different when you do it yourself. Oh, I don't know. Was
it left hand over right, or right hand over left?
Or just all those things that must happen, because that's what. There's a lot of things about murders. Everyone thinks murders are sort of highly purposeful and sort of rather kind of, they have that luxury of having decided to sin boldly. Well, then they're emboldened by that, and they are made sort of powerful and competent by that. And actually, I guess not really. I think, hang on a minute, I
think Chris and I write on a true crime podcast, And quite often in there, people are put to the executioner, and at no point has it ever been. Well, it was his first day, and so there were a couple of attempts made on the neck before such time as the killer was deceased.
Well, it was quite hard to. I was doing some research on this recently, and it is quite hard. Beheading in the traditional way was quite tricky and often not
Still
great.
is.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't.
But it'd be whacking away with these terrible accounts of executions that were botched. Or, I mean, I think that's one of the worst phrases in English is botched execution, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean,
didn't they used to bring like across experienced swordsmen from France for like the monarchs?
Anne Boleyn got that. She petitioned the king for that clemency, and she received it. And I imagine they'd send their top guy, but most people.
Most people got Harry the intern.
Butcher.
I think he would have been a butcher, wouldn't it? Someone, I guess, who would be, or I don't know. Hangmen are interesting, aren't they? It's like the Pierpoints. It was a family business very often that went down generations.
The Pierpoint, in terms of executioners, you kind of go, wow, that's a family legacy.
Yeah.
You imagine like the fifth son who went a bit rogue. He was never going to have like, you've got the heir to the throne, and then the spell. Yeah. And then the fifth son of the legendary executionary family is just like, oh, bollocks. Right.
Yeah.
In a tree.
Yeah. I'm going to do something different with rope, Dad.
Yeah. I'm going to be a mariner. Tie a nice little slip knot.
Yeah. Thing,
well, Richard, it's around this time that we usually play a little game if you fancy it.
I'd love a game. Thank you. I love games.
Well, it's called the 1-Star Superstar. And pretty much what I've done is I've gone and looked at some of your 1-star reviews. I'm not going to read any of them to you, but what I do is I look at what else that person has reviewed, and you have to tell me whether it's 1-star or 5-star.
Okay.
So, the first item is a dash cam. Do you think the person gave a dash cam 1 or 5 stars?
Oh, I'd say a 5-star review.
Okay. Any reason?
Well, I think someone who might not. I think my books are not overburdened with technology. One of the reasons they're set in the 1980s is because I just didn't want to have to murder people with mobile phones and CCTV and stuff. So if someone's into dash cams, they're probably not going to be really interested in murders without a sort of suite of technical equipment to assist. So I'm going to say 5 stars for the dash cam.
Good reasoning. Yeah. Sean, what about you?
See, I might go the actual opposite and think that the dash cam was more disappointing because it equally didn't live up to technological expectations.
Okay, very good.
You never know with these people.
No, we've seen some strange decision making, haven't we? This one is a 1-star review.
Oh.
They've said that it's absolutely useless. It constantly stops when the card is full, which you would expect it to do, surely, if it doesn't have any more storage, but fine. It's hard to wipe the card because the buttons don't work. You have to factory reset it constantly.
Well, I imagine that could be irksome for someone who had unrealistic expectations of what the dash cam could deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last line of it is you get what you pay for. So I imagine he's learned a lesson there at least.
I also worry that people like that are never going to be satisfied. So reading is not really their thing.
Yeah.
Well, they might have valuable things. I had a very odd exchange with someone. So it was the equivalent of 1-star review. It was very cross on Twitter, who felt that I should feel ashamed for using the F word in Murder Before Evensong, and asked if I would use that in a sermon. And I said, well, no, I wouldn't. But then this is a novel, and also the character who says it is part of the character. It's not something I would necessarily say, but I'm writing characters who would say that. But it was an appeal that fell on deaf ears, that somehow anything to do with the vicar using the F word in any way at all was disappointing. And you think, well, that limits my the palette of colours with which I can paint.
Yeah, and also that person would wholeheartedly advocate Shakespeare being taught in schools.
Well,
And
I guess probably.
well,
the other thing I thought is like, I can understand that if you have moral standards, then I would entirely respect your effort to uphold them. But I perhaps think that maybe worse than the use of the F word was actually killing people. But there was no complaint about that.
No. No, the more gruesome the better, but why must you cuss so?
Well, potty mouth. But it was interesting also this idea that somehow you are the character. That's not what I mean. Lots of people seem to think that I'm Daniel, which I'm not at all. And in fact, no character in anything I've ever written is based on anybody, faithfully to be real, apart from one who's Daniel's mother, who's very like my mother. But everybody else is made up, and that's the point, isn't it? Is that you make up a world and you make up the people.
I think that's the thing that people find really hard to understand, is that you write something and they go, but you must know these people, and you're like, no. I actually made them up out of my own good brain. And what's happened there is they seem very real because I understand what makes people seem real. It's quite simple, especially when it's short and they've got a role to play in this part.
But yes, and also people get disappointed because they want things for your characters that have absolutely nothing to do with your characters at all. It's to do with what they want, and you can either meet that expectation or thwart it. And it's very interesting that. Well, that's Misery, isn't it? That's the whole thing that Stephen King so effectively explored in that.
In that fine, but I remember people getting very cross with Chris in his second novel when he killed off an absolutely lovely character.
Well,
but you know what? If he wasn't lovely, what was the point of killing him?
Yeah,
because he had an impact on everyone else, and it changed the face of the crime they were solving.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an interesting one. This one of the things that most fascinated me about writing the first one and the second one, and the third one now, was the stuff that you think is going to be obvious and the stuff you think that is going to be subtle for a reader. Very hard to call that right, I think. I mean, I suppose you just have to do it for your ideal reader, perhaps yourself in the end, and you do it. But it was interesting when he was preaching a sermon. I remember preaching a sermon once, and someone at the end came to me and said, I thought that was brilliant. And I said, oh, thank you very much. What did you like in particular? And then they said the exact opposite of what I'd said. And that was what they'd heard. And I think I said it quite nice.
The opposite message of that you delivered. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you think, oh, well, it's so obvious. There's a whacking great clue there. And I think I need to tone that clue down a little bit. And then nobody gets it. It passes them by.
Yeah, no, the Chekhov's gun is there for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, people need the obvious clues sometimes. I don't know. I think one can worry too much about what people think of your thing, and actually, if you read it, the editors read it, and the majority of people read and go, "That was a good caper. Enjoy that."
Yeah,
that's what you want, people to enjoy it.
Yeah,
I don't want people to be horrified or traumatized, or just enjoy.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something which comes, I suppose, with a little experience. But the other thing about it is that you learn as you go along, don't you? So in book one, you make book one sort of mistakes. You put too much in. You maybe kill someone you might have wanted really to keep. And then I hope as you go along, you sort of get better at it, more thoughtful, a bit more experienced.
Yeah, wouldn't it be delightful if you could map out the whole series and then go, God, that character would be brilliant if I'd kept him. Unfortunately, he died in the first 2 pages. And then...
Well, yeah. Well, and the thing I found was interesting is that I've kind of some characters who I thought would be background have started to take a bit more attention, and that's been interesting. And I don't people not magical thinking about it, is it? About the characters take on lives of their own, all that. And of course, as you said, they live in your head and they are creations, but it's about the plausibility of people, isn't it, and what they do. And when they start doing it, you start realizing that impacts somebody else. You think, oh, well, that's not going to, and that's really fun, isn't it? When it's, well, I say really fun. It's fun when it works out. If it means the whole thing is a farrago of completely incredible nonsense, then you think, oh God, my life is useless. I'm an imposter and a fraud. Here's your advance back. I'm going to go and live in a tree.
Don't live in a tree. This was the monk. The monk who lived in a tree and lived on hazelnuts.
Oh yeah, David the Dendrite. He's one of my favourites. Yeah, it's his day to day actually. David the Dendrite.
But he shouldn't have lived in a tree for that long.
3 years.
Any self-respecting author would come down and go, all right, just because you didn't like the first one, I'll write another one. We'll all be all right.
Well, it's an interesting. Was it some? I don't know. They are your babies in a way, aren't they? And you have to sort of send them into the world and hope that people will want to kiss them rather than run from them with their eyes covered, shuddering with fear.
I think that's what I really enjoyed about writing the Soho Mars, is that there was such a it was a community book. So yes, you had two main characters who were the sort of the young and the old of gay Soho, but around them was everybody else, was the celebrities and and it's hard to not make one of those characters suddenly be the feature, but actually what they do is shine the light on everything from the side. And those are the characters that actually make the books. I love them.
I was running around Soho at that time actually. One of the things I loved was like those little drinking clubs that would, I don't know if they're even there anymore. There's one I used to go to sometimes. And it was just this, I couldn't think why it existed, apart from obviously it's a place to go and get a drink after hours. Yeah. Private drinking club. The clientele was so random, and it was fascinating. The people who worked there had seen everything and knew everybody. And I just thought there is such a wealth of experience and anecdote here.
But also, I loved those clubs for the fact that everybody was welcome, so long as they were members, friends of members, knew how to get in. Yeah. And it's sort of closed doors. It's the weirdest, seediest door, and inside is this lovely place, and it's safe, and it's after hours, and you can have a drink, and you can chat to everyone. You can make friends. You can not make friends. You can, but it was a life behind doors. That was
Well, the clandestine world of the homosexual, of course, is a great place to spend some time if you're up for it, as indeed I was. And I just remember when I arrived in London in 1980, and there were still places where you would knock on a door and a little literally sliding panel would come across and someone would look at you. And I had a sort of part-time, wasn't a job, but I used to help somebody deliver the London Gay Free Sheet, capital Gay it was called. And so we used to get all the pubs and clubs and stuff, but we would also go to some of those places, and there's an extraordinary one where it was basically lawyers and rent boys, I think, and it was just this sort of, how did this start, and how do you join, and how does it work? And I don't know, it was a fascinating subculture of a subculture of a subculture. And I suppose the internet has done for all that sort of thing, really.
I think it has, and I think like why I set those books in the 80s was that it was that sort of burgeoning place, but there's mysteries, there's secrets, and there's even though we're out of the 50s and we're out of the 60s, there's a determination to keep secrets amongst celebrities, amongst politicians, amongst everything else. And it was such a rich place. For the life is much bigger than the crime that they're investigating. The crime is an incidental, and the life and the loves and the challenges and
that's such an interesting point. I think sometimes what crime did was it would open up for broad inspection a world which was normally unobserved. And sometimes you would get people involved with that. I mean, I was very struck often with cops I worked with, how empathetic actually and thoughtful and curious they were very often, not the sort of quite blunt, legalistic types that some of them were, but I was just interested at like lots of people who have cause to tread the less trodden highways and byways of existence. They were often circumspect and not unkind. And I think a couple of cops in particular, I think, were very good on that stuff.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think that the Met Police at the time was quite polarized on those who understood and um, and could listen, and those who were sort of still living in a 1950s environment. Who
It's
were
interesting
quite
because
angry about stuff.
when and so when people encounter those clandestine worlds, sometimes it's very interesting because they discover stuff about themselves, stuff that is never in relief or in light at all in their everyday life, because so much of that stuff is automated, so you don't have to think about it or whatever. Then all of a sudden you're in this strange world, and it's challenging, and it makes you confront aspects of yourself, especially very often happens in churches too, that you weren't fully aware of, and that can make things seem all of a sudden quite volatile. And that's another way in which people get into trouble, I think, and cause
Yeah,
trouble, is because, ooh, all of a sudden the world has gone strange and they've gone strange.
I think that was what, again, sort of drawing back to that, fascinated me about what makes people do stuff, and say, is it my inner repression that makes me rebel against this? Is it my hatred of difference that makes me rebel? So all of those little questions that create a nuance, and but also, like, one of the main detective characters of mine, he forms a relationship with the police officer, and the two of them are in a loving couple, but obviously, as a policeman, that's not well met by his colleagues.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a narrative trope I find interesting myself.
Yeah, I love it. I love the world. I love writing those characters.
Yeah, and I think so people going native is quite fascinating. Clergy missionaries used to do it quite often, would, find themselves more adapted to the world they were in than they thought they ever would be. And
Yeah,
that's interesting.
go explore, find a bit of new. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
See, we did warn you that this would go off piece from
Oh, yeah.
your from your standard conversation about what book are we bringing out this week. But it's been such an honor and a privilege to talk to you.
Oh, blimey. Well, no, it's all mine, honestly.
Ha, pished.
Patrol.
Sure to you, sir. And I meant it to sting. And it's been a lovely way to close off this session of the Blood Brothers. We will not say never.
No, I think you should rush to bring them back.
Yes, it may have a different face, a slightly cleaner face. But it's been absolutely well, enlightening and delightful to speak to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I really
agreed.
enjoyed it. I'm sorry going on so much.
I'm really looking forward to more of Canon Daniel Clement.
Thank you.
Long may he investigate.
Thank you. I might just take you on a little trip through some of Soho's darker corners in books 4.
Yes, I like
Yes.
that. Well, I might send you some of Soho's lighter corners.
Well, that'd be lovely.
6 of they are delightful, but most
Thank you.
a very upbeat with "if you know it, you know it" undertones.
Excellent.
But
That sounds
but
great.
I'll get in touch with your people and send you a copy of them.
Well, I'd love to see it. Thank you.
They are fun. I think you're mentioned in book 3.
Wow.
Not by
That's so
name,
exciting.
but by band name at least.
Oh, that's very good. I've just, in book 3 of the Canon Daniel Clement series, I've just included an item of Communard's merchandise.
Yes, please.
So I'm not sure if that's got a name in literary criticism or intertextuality or something.
Listen,
I don't know.
I don't know what it is, but if you can, you must, as my family always say.
Pair of boxer shorts. The Communard's logo proudly emblazoned on them.
Yeah, what a way to end.
This is not merch we can supply, people.
No, afraid not. It's all in the V&A now, folks.
Oh, what a delightful exhibit that would be.
Well, the thought. But it's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you for having
lovely
me on.
to talk
really
to you too,
it.
and thank you very much for delighting us with a new series of Cozy to get inside.
Thank you, and I wish you very great success and happiness in everything.
And you too.
Thank
That's
you.
good, isn't it?
Much love. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.